This is the fourth installment of Anglicans You Didn't Know You Knew. And in this series, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to introduce once again Anglicans that Americans are aware of for some notable reason or another, but they don't realize that the foundation of their beliefs, their culture, that they're raised in owes in great part to Anglican forefathers. If you are an American, and the Anglican faith is part of your cultural, your historical, and even your religious foundation as well. So today I want to introduce to you, or reintroduce to you, Jane Austen. Jane Austen was an English novelist, as pretty much everybody knows. She was born in 1775, died in 1817, so a very short 41 years of life. According to biographers, she was actually never known as a novelist in her time, which I'll mention a little bit later. She was born on December 16th of 1775, as I mentioned, there in Steventon Rectory in Hampshire, in England, seventh child of a country clergyman named George and his wife Cassandra Austen. Jane's closest sibling was her sister, her older sister, also named Cassandra, named after her mother. When Jane was about 25 years old, her father retires, and she, Cassandra, and the mother and father they all move to Bath. There she begins to write a novel called The Watsons. This one actually is never completed. Jane and her siblings were all primarily educated at home. Of course, their father had a massive and extensive library that they could all draw from, so that was very helpful. Though she lived a quiet life, she had quite a lot of access to the outside world, or to the greater world, through her two brothers. She had two brothers in the Royal Navy, Francis and Charles. Austen and her sister took part in the privileged life. They were of the landed gentry. This is really reflected in a lot of her writings, people will tell you. She began writing comic stories early on. Her first, what would be maybe written or known as biographers call her mature work, was composed when she was about 19 years old. She wrote a novel called Lady Susan in 1794. This book is unique in that it was a series of letters, but it was unfortunately never published. This book was published, but not long. It was published after her death, let me put it that way. In her early 20s, Jane wrote novels, the names you will know, but had different names in the beginning. For example, she wrote Sense and Sensibility. That one was actually originally called Eleanor and Marianne, and that she wrote that in 1795. She wrote Pride and Prejudice, which you also know, but it was actually first called First Impressions. That was written in 1796. Now, interestingly, her father takes the manuscript of Pride and Prejudice, the one that's called First Impressions, to a publisher. It's rejected. He sells the manuscript for the novel Susan for £10, British currency, £10. It sits in the archives until it's repurchased a year before Jane dies, and it's repurchased for the price that the publisher had given them in the first place. So no money made on that. Now notice the interesting here about the timeline between writing and publishing. In 1811, she's 35 years old when Sense and Sensibility is finally published, which identifies, by the way, the author as a lady. Just says a lady. Pride and Prejudice is published in 1813, Mansfield Park, 1814, and then Emma in 1815. So again, long after they're written. The title page of each book refers to other books in kind of that series, so to speak. And again, they all give kind of credibility to the writer, but again, it's just, there's no name given to the author. She begins writing the novel that would later be called Persuasion in 1815, and it's finished the following year, 1816. By this time, however, her health is declining and beginning to fail. The probable cause of her illness was Addison's disease, which is some kind of hormonal disease where your body doesn't produce enough of certain hormones. Regarding Anglicanism in particular, Jane Austen, someone has Anglicanism and Jane Austen together, I should say. Someone has actually written a book on that very subject, interestingly enough, and it's called Jane Austen's Anglicanism by Laura White. Some have questioned not necessarily Jane's Anglicanism, but really her level of adherence to the Christian faith and its call to a certain lifestyle. Her wit and sometimes even her cattiness her speech and her writings seems to some people speak otherwise. But White's book explains Austen's behavior in light of the times that she lived in, and of course in her writings as well. White is very well versed in 18th century Anglicanism, and therefore she's very attuned to the religious overtones that are actually found in Jane Austen's writings. She says actually that Jane's views on death, nature, moral issues, the church were all certainly in line with the Anglicanism of the time. On April 12th, 1817, she writes her will, and she names Cassandra, her older and favorite sister, as her heir. She dies in the early hours of July 18th, 1817, and then a few days later, she's buried in Winchester Cathedral, again, only 41 years old. And again, mentioning earlier, interestingly, her gravestone, visited by hundreds of admirers every year, does not mention that she was an author. Her novels have been adapted for the large screen and also for the small screen, beginning as early as 1938. There was an interest there taken, and movies were made of her books. 3 prayers. She's known for writing 3 prayers, and I'll give you the text of a little bit of each of these prayers. But they do show the devout nature of Jane Austen, and despite some people questioning how devout she actually was, she writes this in the first prayer of the 3 that I'll list. She says these words: "Give us grace, Almighty Father, so to pray as to deserve to be heard, to address thee with our hearts as with our lips. Thou art everywhere present, from thee no secret can be hid." So there you definitely see a deep spirituality, but also a quoting there. It looks like from where no secrets can be hid. That's a line from our opening collect, the collect for purity that we open our service with. So definitely familiar with the liturgy, it sounds like. Here's some words from the second of the 3 prayers. I'll let you hear. She writes this: "Almighty God, look down with mercy on thy servants here assembled, and accept the petitions now offered up unto thee. Pardon, O God, the offenses of the past day. We are conscious of many frailties. We remember with shame and contrition many evil thoughts and neglected duties." It goes on from there. And then the third one, I want to give you one more from a third and final prayer that we know that she written. Here are the words, here are the opening words to that prayer. "Father of heaven, whose goodness has brought us in safety to the close of this day, dispose our hearts in fervent prayer. Another day is now gone and added to those for which we were before accountable." So they all are well crafted, obviously, like her writings. And all 3 of these include the Lord's Prayer within them. She puts the Lord's Prayer right near the end or at the very end of each of those prayers. So Jane Austen, Anglican woman of great renown, someone Americans know but didn't realize her Anglican roots, great writing talent, and certainly a devout Christian woman, another Anglican that Americans admire, and one that we are proud as Anglicans to call someone of her stature one of our own.